Hello, beautiful community. Let me know if you can hear me as ever. Happy Sunday. This country that I'm in has a new king. I'm trying to break the world record for the most unusual time to do this. And I think that's lovely because it means there's a smaller number of us. Everybody should really be asleep. In the United States and in North America. So there we go. Welcome, welcome everybody. You can hear me? Sounds good? Okay. I am still up because my sleeping pattern has gone upside down because I did a radio thing this morning very early by my standards and actually didn't go to bed. But with my condition, actually systematic resting is more important than sleep. Let us have a look at what you are asking. I'm so happy. There's 200 of us. I'm so happy. There's a very small number, which is fantastic. Ferrari guy, I'm sorry you haven't been sleeping. Hello, everybody. Thank you for seeing the Nordic documentary that I made a contribution to. Anybody who has done that, that's wonderful. It's a good, solid, long-distance journalistic project. Let's have a look at what is going on here. I just saw a question about Brezhnev. How Elsie Nombre is asking, how much of Russia's policy, specifically the fruits of the paranoia and conspiracy theories of the Brezhnev era, when Putin et al. Came of age? I think that there is something to the fact that Patrushev Senior and Mr. Putin came out of a certain generation. And I do think that some of the anti-Western, some of the flavors of the anti-Western narratives come from there. I do think that some of the flavors of the bogus anti-colonialism also come from there. But in the end, this is a very different project to anything Brezhnevite. Yeah, Johnny, you can ask questions in the chat. It's a very different project. I believe this has more in common with European fascism than it does with Soviet communism. And I think there are even elements of a kind of religious fundamentalism, actually, to this regime that may have been present in the Soviet project early on, may have been present in certain forms of practiced Leninism. But that's really rather alien to the Soviet project. I mean, this idea that if things are going really badly against us, maybe we can just make a mess of the world unconstructively, which kind of leads to a sort of magical thinking that divides today from tomorrow, as though you can get to tomorrow without having to deal with the consequences tomorrow of everything you've caused today. So this kind of division, almost miraculous, magical division between now and later, as though you could organize a kind of bloodbath today and it won't count once the leaf of history is turned. That is of the essence of fundamentalist violence. And there's a little bit of that going on. There's a little bit of that. And there is even a little bit of that in the way we should understand Putin's psychology about nuclear apocalypse. Now, I'm not saying Putin wants nuclear apocalypse, but I'm saying he wants to avoid it less definitively than we do. So I think that there are differences, and this is a much more curious animal that has significant discontinuities with the Soviet period. The best thing an ordinary citizen in the West can do to help with this or with anything else is watch for their democracy not to be toppled. Because once your democracy is toppled, you can't do anything. You can't do good foreign policy, you can't do climate policy, you can't do domestic policy, you can't do anything. That's the most important thing. Edmuth is asking, what did I make of the arrest during the coronation? These were anti-monarchist protesters in the UK. I haven't looked at it closely enough, but my impression is that the arrests were disproportionate and unacceptable. But I do have mixed things to say about the coronation and some good things to say too. Jorm, greetings back to you in Norway. Glad you watched that film. Michael, good day, mate. In Aussie land. Andy, in Aussie land. Tina, in Aussie land. Look, the assassination attempts on various Russian pro-war folks is just a kind of a breakage of a bizarre, sort of naive dream. Just getting a notification that Perun has released a video. This is a very small echo chamber we're all in, isn't it? I think that there's a kind of illusion among some of these Z radicals that they can go on with stuff and it won't come back to bite them, as though you can imperialistically and with genocidal elements invade a country, that you can be right behind that and be a participant in that indeed, and that nothing's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen to you. And as we say, this stuff will multiply. Ukrainian drones will multiply on Russian territory. Various Ukrainian operations on Russian territory will multiply. This war will dramatically relocate to Russian territory during the course of this year. And as this is going to be just a very short live, I'm probably going to release a video today, just a casual chat again on this chat channel, about the drone panic that's happening in the Moscow area. There's genuinely a drone panic in the Moscow area. And this was happening before the Kremlin attack too, with just inordinate number of police callouts when people saying that they spotted a drone or something has crashed and so on. And this is just the beginning. And the correct analysis with this is that this does favor Ukraine. More of this happening does favor Ukraine, but we need to talk about why. Harvest crop bringer. Hey, Vlad, greetings from down under. Greetings back. Missing my favorite spots above all in South Australia, always missing Karakalinga for anyone who knows South Australia. I even managed to live on that beach at some point for quite a few months. Could Prigozhin, Boris is asking, be making a move towards greater power in the Russian armed forces? No. But car bomb panic could come later. I think Prigozhin is clearly in a huge conflict with Shoigu and Gerasimov, with the Ministry of Defense, with the head of the army. He also wants to cover his back, not to humiliate the Wagner group. He also doesn't want to get into trouble with various elements of the criminal world that he could be in trouble with for meeting all of these prisoners. And he's still, got an access to Putin that others are very jealous of. So we shouldn't understand Prigozhin as being some kind of revolutionary. Prigozhin has a more direct line to Putin than many other folks. And we don't know how far what he's up to is simply a product of whatever communication he's having with the president. Um, and indeed, that is his only political capital. If that goes for him, everything goes. And that's why he's always desperate to build up any kind of things he can latch on to, including institutional types of grounding that would give him something to stand on uh, over and above his link to Putin. But he doesn't have much more than the link to Putin. So I've commented. Depends, Alex. It depends on which comments of Prigozhin you're talking about. I've commented. That's the last video on this channel. I've commented on the two dramatic statements that Prigozhin made. One about pulling out of Bakhmut, and one about the ammunition starvation, where he said we got 30% of what we needed, and now we're getting 10% and we can't fight like this. Messit Sod is saying, as a self-professed China non-expert, in the hypothetical breakup of Russia, despite Chinese efforts to prevent it, do you think China will move troops across the border in order to secure order, interest, and reclaim all territory? Well, when all hell is breaking loose on that level, that is possible, absolutely. Yeah. But short of a Russian breakup, China could exert enormous influence on different parts of Russia. So if Russia is in such a bad way that it is about to break up, before that happens, you would already expect bits of Russia to be under a very heavy Chinese influence, if not control. Tested Trekkies saying greetings from a Snowden house in the New South Wales Southern Highlands. Right? What? NSW? No, why am I having a brain? How am I confusing everything with Australia? I'm just I was just speaking early in the night with an Australian friend, and I'm just reading everything. Look, greetings back, no question. This happens when you don't sleep at night. Let's have a look. Lots of Kiwis and Aussies. Yeah, I'm just, my brain is melted down, but it's okay. We can still make it. In reaction to the Moscow drones, Donut Reader is saying the authorities have jammed GPS in Moscow, creating havoc. Well, so normally it's jammed around the Kremlin, and now it's pretty much jammed up to the Moscow Ring Road, I think. So that's Alex. This is live, hence I'm having a meltdown about misreading comments. Yeah, so they've jammed now, like everything within 3 kilometers of the Kremlin. Stone Shark, a great bit on the BBC today. Yes, I was on BBC Radio Wales this morning talking about the drone situation and the counteroffensive. Haven't watched Caspian Report's latest video. It's too general a question, Letty, to ask, are Russian people capable of transcending authoritarianism? Every people is capable of transcending authoritarianism, obviously. But the question is it going to happen? And the answer to that is going to be a product of what I would call social explanation, cultural historical explanation, which is the sort of thing we've done a lot of, looking at cultural myths, and psychological explanation too, perhaps. So that's going to be the answer. I think a lot of the debate, Litty, as you find it in the real world, is about whether Russia can decentralize and defederalize successfully. And if it neither decentralizes nor breaks up, somebody might argue that it's impossible for it to transcend authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and I would argue that's probably right. Murray, thank you. Um, Alexa is asking if I'm going to keep this stream. I keep most of them unless I think they're just of no value. Because what I've basically kept all of them so far, but I don't know about this one. Because basically, what happens if that video is up, I need to feel that anybody who's subscribing and watching it not in real time, that's really worth whatever 30 minutes of their life. And if I don't feel confident about that, then I probably don't keep it up. Love back. Okay, question. Let's say something bad happens during Victory Day parade. Is that the point the point Swan Lake starts playing on Russian television? No, it's not. So during this drone attack, and I'm planning, I don't know what I'm planning. I might even just do a Twitter thread about who I think may have done this. Looking at the Ukrainian state, pro-Ukrainian groups in Russia, Russian opposition partisans. It's not a candidate. Z radicals, the Kremlin. But in the course of that conversation, you kind of reach this extraordinary, erratic, and anxious reaction from the Kremlin to the drone attack. And what you felt is that for a moment they were almost ready to release what I call the total war folder, moving from the special military operation to the total war. That folder is still a bit dusty. They haven't taken it out. They're keeping it in case things go horrendously for them during Ukraine's counteroffensive. And they were never really going to get it out after this. But it looked like they kind of asked a question of themselves about it, and could this be the time for it? It looked like they were going there in some of the mixed messages that came out, going there at least by way of exploring it with a toe or two, but in the end being settled on balance that this is not the right time for it. So if there's a 9th of May parade and there's an explosion in the middle of the parade, I think that they would have a serious conversation about taking that book out. But would this destabilize the Putin regime? No, it would consolidate it. At least for now. Lorelei Mary is asking, what is that vision of the future you keep talking about, Vlad, that the blob in the middle need to have? It's not a specific vision. It's the visceral sense that there is an alternative. It's the visceral sense that here we can descend into the inferno with Mr. Putin, and that's this way. But here we can choose something different. We can choose the sort of thing that, you know, would take us closer to other ex-Soviet states in a more democratic path. I mean, closer in the kind of where you practice your politics and do political institutions. So that's it, basically. It's that these people do not see that there is an alternative, and that the alternative is actionable. So it's just a sense that there is an alternative and that the alternative is actionable. What it is cannot be framed ahead of events. Events themselves will frame that. But the sense that there is something worth acting for that is not this is what's missing. In Hong Kong, here in Hong Kong, the Lion Sam is saying the free city has been deconstructed and replaced in short order. Is change in the other direction from authoritarian to some kind of democracy possible in Russia? Well, it's very sad what's happening. It's happening in Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong, I think, in 2018 last. Um, of course, change is possible from authoritarianism to some kind of democracy in Russia. What I would say is that um, do not expect a global trend with things swaying back toward democracy from authoritarianism. We need to talk about global social forces at work that would probably prevent this. You can have swings here and there, but do not expect a global pro-democratic wave. Do not expect the resuscitation of some kind of Fukuyamian story. Um, with Russia in particular, the answer is, yep, Russia goes democratic if it radically decentralizes or breaks up. Um, without that, it just can't. That seems to me to be an sort of unoriginal opinion of mine. Um, Alex, thank you so much. How do I approach international relations theory as a philosopher? Um, can one disentangle the descriptive claims from the normative claims of realism, for example? Um, great question. I think this does need a separate episode. Are there modes of explanation in international that international relations theory in most of its theoretically elaborate incarnations just is insensitive to? Is there diversity, culturally mediated diversity of political action that international relations theories that generalize our conduct as mediated by institutions, particularly by states? Is there a greater diversity of political conduct that is a product of deep cultural difference that these theories allow? And indeed, how do these theories handle various kinds of thorny challenges around fact value distinctions and so on? But I think this is a big conversation. We will have it. I think it's a really important question. My answer would be skeptical, right? I don't think that when John Mearsheimer is getting Russia wrong, he's getting Russia wrong because he's got Russia wrong. He's getting Russia wrong because um, an enormously powerful political manifestation falls outside of the range of explanation of his theory. That's a problem. That is a problem. Um, as I sort of somewhat tongue in cheek say, you do not want to be reviewing a Vietnamese restaurant from an altitude of 10,000 feet. Um, so I'm confident I'm going to answer your question properly just because quite a few people have asked me to do it. And so therefore we'll get there. Liam, good afternoon. Michael, Prigozhin's end game is survival and consolidation in time for a period of for the period of the post-Putin transit. So when we get to that time, Prigozhin wants to be in a position that is minimally sort of physically survivable and then sufficiently powerful. Power and physical safety are central motivations for him. And this is really an underspoken topic. So many of the Russian elites are planning for a post Putin future and trying to position themselves for a post Putin future. And the war just threw this sort of big stick in their wheel because um, they have been forced, and at least as far as they see it, by the war to ally themselves with Putin more than they really wanted to, and to tie their destiny to his a bit more than they wanted to. But nevertheless, despite the intrusion of the war, they are still trying to position themselves for a post-Putin future. Um, I doubt that Prigozhin has presidential ambitions, whatever that might mean. But what we do have to realize, Michael, I think, is that um, when the Putin regime collapses, we're not going to have Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden or Mitt Romney taking over in Russia. You're going to have, in the next thing that comes, a lot of the people that were part of this thing. And even when we talk about uh, Mr. Navalny coming to power, Mr. Navalny is not going to be sitting there with his organization. He's going to be sitting there probably with people who were part of the process of imprisoning him and trying to kill him. That is how it's going to look. It's not that there's going to be a clear out. It's going to be an extraordinary set of very ugly alliances. And it's going to require enormous compromise from the liberal democratic opposition if they want to be um, actors there rather than just moralized commentators from the sidelines. Zeus is saying Russia used to have a sort of senior position in the ex-Soviet space. Could Ukraine assume it? This is an interesting question, and I think it depends on where Ukraine goes. I think there is one kind of story which makes Ukraine a kind of leader on the ex-Soviet space. But there is another story that says, no, Ukraine isn't that. Ukraine wants to be a European country like the Czech Republic. And so what role Ukraine plays regionally and in Europe, I think is an important conversation that Ukraine will be having with itself. And the more comprehensively Ukraine wins, which depends on what we do, quite frankly, the easier that kind of exploration will be for Ukraine to have with itself. Mobilization, how many waves of mobilization before the pain threshold is reached? They're going to go past the pain threshold easily. If it gets tough, Putin will just declare total war. So quite frankly, I am, of course, struck by the limitations of Russia's capacity to train and arm these people. But their capacity to keep mobilizing, I think, is very extensive indeed. So in sheer low quality manpower, it's a nearly a bottomless story there. Michael, pleasure to answer you. Lorelei Mary is saying the corruption of Russia's education system concerns me the most. I'm always about 17 video ideas behind on the main channel, largely because of my health. But one of the video ideas I've had is Putin and children. Now, of course, Putin has practiced stealing Ukrainian children, but there's another story there about the extraordinary miseducation of children that is happening, children of the younger generation, especially like young kids. They're being essentially inducted into a scenario whereby there's going to be a massive war against the West in 2030. And so even though quite clearly right now, Putin does not want to escalate, doesn't want to de-escalate either, but doesn't want to escalate. He doesn't want to internationalize the war. He doesn't want Western support to grow. But he does want to escalate later, once the war freezes, once Western democracies wobble, once Western support for Ukraine decreases in his mind. Um, and for that, he's prepping young kids. And so that is probably the single most terrifying thing happening in Russia at the moment. So I'm worried about that very much. Um, Lukash is asking, do you think a war between NATO and Russia would be a civilization-ending event? Um, well, Putin thinks he's already at war with NATO. Um, it depends. I mean, certainly some direct confrontation between NATO and Russia does not have to be a civilization-ending event. Um, and if Russia used, which isn't on the cards at the moment, and even if it were, another card would be pulled first. The total war card would be pulled first domestically before nuclear weapons are used in Ukraine. Um, and there is no plan to do that really at this stage. Um, but if Putin used nuclear weapons on a small scale, no, that is not likely to lead to global nuclear apocalypse. But there's a risk. It's just how high do you want it? Um, so I am not one of those people who say Putin, uh, just like us, simply will never go there. I don't think that's a supportable position. So I think, especially for somebody like me who thinks that that nuclear risk at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis was perhaps a little overestimated. For somebody who thinks that, I would probably say that we're going to be facing higher nuclear risk in the next couple of years than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There is the school of thought that says that China has said to Putin that he's not to use nuclear weapons and that the West has appropriately threatened him. And it's a very common thought. It's almost become an orthodoxy among Western journalists, and it's completely insupportable. Completely insupportable. The basic reality is that Putin does not threaten nuclear apocalypse and doesn't do nuclear blackmail much when he feels stable. When he feels unstable, as he did in September 2022, he threatens it. And so, what will happen if Ukraine does a phenomenal job with the counteroffensive? Um, the most ludicrous nuclear blackmail we've had so far. That's what will happen. And tragically, it'll work in part. Putin's nuclear blackmail has worked. Um, I mean that is what frustrates um, Ben Hodges, for example, how much Putin's nuclear blackmail has worked. Michael is saying, is there something deeper going on with the recent arrests of lifestyle bloggers? Is this a sign of a change? So a change in attitude by the government. So there's two sides to this. There's genuinely a, a, a tax loop side to this, that a lot of these sort of non-political bloggers have been doing tax loopholes, and it's just now the government decided to go after them. But there is also potentially a political side there, which is just this sort of uh, inexorable momentum of repression. It's shocking how much it's a thing that goes like this. That once you get it going, it just has an autonomy of its own. So we're going to see more and more of this. We're going to see more and more clamping down, not just on opposition, but on kind of heterodoxy. Um, so I do think that this is the repressive machine um, just going on further. But I also think there are some funny tax issues there that these people are being hit for. Jude is asking, why did it take us so long? There's a question from Grace, actually, for the long form Q&A that I'm hoping to do the next day or two, also on this channel, with lots of questions from Patreon and from the YouTube comment section. And Grace was asking, why did we not get worked up very much by Russia annexing Crimea? And part of the answer is going to be that it's maskirovka, that Western citizens are impossible to motivate if what you're trying to motivate them is to get serious about a war that is a hybrid war. Because is it there? Is it not? I mean, yes, some people have fallen out of the sky, and yes, some territory has been shifted without the consent of people living on it. But is it a war? Is it not? It looks quite uncertain. It lacked that clarity of the full-scale invasion. And there's more I'm going to add in that answer too. Eagle Mob, can we trust Russia again? Do not trust Putin, but negotiate with people in and around him. That's my policy, because you're trying to siphon them off from him, and that's how any post-Putin transition works. But I'm against negotiating with Putin. He's gone all in with his cards. It's clear. Poland's democracy is at some risk, and we'll talk about democratic degeneration in Eastern Europe. Exaggerated swagger. Look, there is plenty of even ER literature methodologically questioning ER. We'll get there probably in that IR. We'll get to that probably in the IR conversation. Somebody is saying Dorian's question. Smith is saying that Dorian's question is good. Let's have a look. Dorian. Dorian is asking, what's the difference between indoctrination in the Soviet Union and modern day Russia? So we discussed this a bit in some of the recent videos. And there has been a change. So when the war began, there's a propaganda video on the main channel that touches this. But now that propaganda video is a bit out of date. It's 80% right now. When the war began, Russian propaganda was post-truth propaganda. So it wanted to saturate the information environment with ill-assorted thoughts and images that would make you doubt whether anything is true at all, right? Soviet propaganda wanted to convince you of an alternate picture of reality. It didn't want to say nothing is true. It wanted to say these things are true, please believe them. And if you said, I don't believe them, it would say, we'll get you for that. Or in later this later Soviet period, it would say, okay, just please pretend at least. That's the difference. But what's happened recently is that the Putin regime has introduced a bit more Soviet-style propaganda, where they're not just sort of polluting the informational environment with the aspiration of detethering you from truth, including potentially the truth of the message. In other words, this post-truth propaganda doesn't want you to believe that it is telling you the truth either. It wants you to doubt everything itself too. But recently, there's been a bit more Soviet-style propaganda, which says no, there are some things that just are objectively true, and so not all truth is to be melted away. And one thing that's true is that we are building little by little towards some very vast confrontation with the West. We don't know what shape it will take, but little by little, we need to rearrange our society to meet that task. And that's back also to the question about children earlier. Crimea is Ukraine. You know, one thought I have, I've shared so many of my thoughts about Crimea with you. Here is one that I haven't shared. Um, Russian society, and I've been several times to Russia since Crimea, but before the war, um, took a very toxic turn after Crimea, after 2014. And you could feel it even in the dinner at the dinner table in private settings. People were more tense, more destructive energies were liberated. Um, Families feuded about this. Um, so there would be something, abstracting away everything else we might say about this, there'd be something therapeutic for Russians about losing Crimea. It's inevitably for them now a kind of a deep source of sickness. Um, Now, Crimea is a problem because most Russians still want to keep it. Um, but um, it's extraordinary how toxicity inducing it is. And actually, if you take away all the political considerations, it's it would be enormously therapeutic for Russia to lose Crimea just on that level. Hello, Perun. Um, Congratulations on your recent video. Um, enormous work you put into them. Hi, Vlad. Quick extension to the propaganda question. What's your view on the logic behind the MOD making demonstrably incorrect military claims, like denying strikes that are openly visible? Prune, do you mean denying strikes, Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian territory? Is that the question? So they're struggling with this. They have had a bit of an instinct now to say, well, if something is just obviously true, maybe we should just say it happened. But I mean, they don't want to go around saying Ukraine is increasingly conducting operations on Russian territory. Um, they're going to have to deal with that somehow, because one of my predictions is that the war will increasingly move on to Ukrainian territory, onto Russian territory in 2023. Um, there's a positive drone panic going on in the Moscow area now. I'm being told of 200 police callouts a day with um, drone claims of drones being spotted. Um, so they're going to have to deal with this, and they're trying to balance um, what they shouldn't fight. For example, the recent self-bombing that happened, they decided not to fight it. They decided not to blame it on Ukraine. Um, but you tell me, Prune, if I'm okay, if I'm answering your question. Yes, I am answering your question. Um, mm, so at the moment, they are on the back foot about this, and they're going to have to develop a strategy about it. That's my basic answer. I felt from following Kremlin jinx for a quarter of a century that their reaction to the drone attack was all over the place, all over the place. They were wondering how much to play it down. Then they tried to play it up. Then they tried to play it down again. And they took it off the news on the evening, on the following evening. Um, So they're trying to work it out, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with the drone panic that is going on. And this is forcing them into this conversation about how far they tell the population that they're going to transition out of the mode of special military operation into full-scale war. Um, that is more existential. And this in turn takes us back to the question of how far does Putin want to politicize? I mean, I'm like a broken record here, but how much Putin wants to politicize his population with all the uncertain consequences of that, and how much he wants to keep them depoliticized. Yeah. Okay. I get it. I think this is going to happen more and more. I think things are going to keep blowing up in Russia. And I think the range and the breadth of these occurrences um, will dramatically grow. I think it'll be like nothing what we've seen so far. And they're going to have to react to it. Now, one of the other things that's worth bearing in mind here is that they progressively are stopping distinguishing Ukraine doing this versus the West doing this. So progressively in the last half a year or so, the narrative has moved from we're at war with Ukraine, and they might want to be at war with NATO later, to we're just at war with NATO. Um, it is easier for them, they feel, to frame attacks on their territory as NATO-sponsored activity than it is to say that this country doesn't in fact exist, if you think about it properly, is doing this to us. Um, they will be watching how far this affects that depoliticized blob in the middle, that 50 or 60% of the population that have outsourced politics to the Kremlin, that they've exchanged having private freedom for not, they've exchanged private freedom for public freedom. Because the Z radicals are already on top of everything that's going on. They know about these attacks. And the anti war people, that's 20% and 20%, the anti war people also know exactly what's going on. Um, so it's only that depoliticized blob, 50, 60% of the population, that are vulnerable to various Kremlin messages about how what's happening might not be happening. And they'll keep watching how that demographic is responding, and they'll keep working out what to do with that demographic. So that's the target, basically, the target audience for all of their discourse about, Ukraine blowing up oil facilities. Perun, thank you for dropping by. Really, really appreciate that. And it's still Sunday for you. Yeah, it still is just about Sunday for you. Sunday night. Hello, Vendel. Matt is asking, doesn't the depoliticized blob have to be personally economically affected for them to become politicized? They need to feel that there's some possibility of an alternative. That is the central thing, actually. That is the central thing. Cynthia, thank you so much. That is the central thing. Personally affected, it depends. I certainly think that economic calamity will not create anti-Putin momentum at all. If anything, it'll go in Putin's favor. Progressive poverty in Russia will go in Putin's favor, will consolidate the regime. But stuff blowing up all over the place, sure. Extra stuffing saying 1420 is very interesting. Yes, but notice that the vast majority of people would say no to such an interview. And I would also recommend people not to speak to 1420 if they asked me. um, if they were going to say anti-regime things. Um, but that's just my judgment. Somebody else could say, no, you have to speak. Um, so it's enormously illuminating what you get there, but understand that you have to really interpret that what you are uh, watching there is a process of people who are partly hostages being told to speak, and some of them do, some of them don't. The majority don't. Um, Radiation. We're at 50 minutes. We're going to stop at an hour because I'm still going to do a little video today, I think. Um, Radiation is saying, why no NATO forces on the ground in Ukraine, especially if Russia already wants to challenge Article 5? Russia does not want to challenge Article 5 anytime soon. It wants to challenge it much later. Nuclear war. If you told Joe Biden now, put American troops on the ground, the answer is number one, nuclear war. Not going to do that. Nuclear war risk. Number two, American citizens will not accept it. So that's roughly the answer. But I mean, let me put it more bluntly. Ukraine would love it. Would you? Keep that an open question. In other words, if the United States put troops on the ground in Ukraine, would that make the risk to life of everybody in the stream go up tenfold? Yeah, it would. So the nuclear risk is not a talking point; it's real. But is it impossible that there is a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia eventually? It's not impossible. I'd go further. I think that the odds of a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia are worryingly high. Adam, thank you so much for being here. It's what is it for you? It's early. Is it early Sunday morning? Love to connect. I've dropped you a message, I think, on LinkedIn. Tell me how to find you. Tell me how to find you. And have a wonderful rest of the day. Everybody, this YouTube business is an interesting business. It's an interesting business. Gerald is talking about political visions of the future. I think we ourselves struggle with that so much. And so I think one of the things I want to do is talk with you about visions of the future that are about us, because I think we struggle with it. It's not that we're completely debilitated when it comes to normative thought, like the Russian population is to a good extent. It's rather that we can't quite see it. Like, what are we working toward? What is a kind of a purposive vision that our democracies have? Where are we going to be 10, 20 years from now? What are we working toward? Beyond just trying to solve this or that crisis. I think that's a hugely important conversation. Bob Marley is asking how old I am. On Wednesday, I'm 42. Where does Lavrov see himself in 5 years? Lavrov is on a train. He can't get up. He can't get off. Yeah, Adam, I'm thinking about that issue, probably at a ratio of 3-1 to thinking about Russian politics, a crisis of faith in our institutions. And it's ubiquitous. It just affects everything. It affects every sphere of society. It's extraordinary. Um, yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. It's about all expertise, all institutions, all relationships, also between humans that are mediated by something else, right? So I think it's hugely constructive to talk about it. And yeah, amazing you're using your platform to go there. I think that it's hugely important. Um, so yeah, find me on um, just DM me anywhere, wherever is convenient for you. 5 more minutes, everybody, and then I'm gonna jump off with love. CR Matheny saying how to deal with leftists. Well, I have a kind of a cringe-worthy answer, which is that um, I can't find a single Ukrainian leftist. No, I'm not a socialist, but I can't find a single Ukrainian socialist who is soft on Russian imperialism. And I think we'd struggle to find many in some of the neighboring East European countries as well that have a bad history with Russia. So my first rather frivolous and cringy response is go speak to leftists in Ukraine, see what they tell you. Um, number one. Number two is to softly and subtly challenge the Americanocentrism of some of this sort of left aversion to recognizing the horrors of this imperial self-immolation that Russia is engaged in. Um, because once you stop focusing on the United States as the source of everything terrible, and once you stop focusing on the United States as being the source of um, as being a kind of a specially deliberate source of all terrible things. It's not just the United States does all the bad things, is that all the bad things the United States does, it does always in a kind of with a functional deliberacy. They're never products of folly. Um, so, you know, develop sympathy for leftists in Eastern Europe with experience of Soviet imperialism. Colonel Kurtz, thank you so much. Breakfast time, lunchtime in the UK at the moment. Happy birthday to me. Yes, thank you. Russians are terribly superstitious. So when I was little, it was said to be a bad idea to tell people happy birthday before the day itself. Um, but I'm not superstitious in that way. Lorelei Mary is saying, I love how you've created a community. Look, I might do a video about who did the drone attack on the Kremlin today, just a casual chat and maybe a Twitter thread. But do I really want you to think one thing or another? I don't care what you think. But do I care if you feel you're responding to the world a little bit in a slightly more enriched way? Yeah. So for me, this is about process, um, not what view you hold. I don't I'm interested more in what concerns you and how it concerns you, how you walk with these concerns, than whether you've decided that, oranges are better than apples. I'm you know, not so committed to that. And I just think that trust doesn't happen except as part of a process that involves a community. And I think even thought doesn't properly happen. Um, unless it is, let me put it this way, dialogue that's constructive doesn't properly happen unless there's some kind of ongoing relationship. And of course I can't influence any of you beyond an infinitesimal amount, but I'm trying to set a sort of culture for us. um you know so let us have a look. Zeus is saying you're a leftist. He's a leftist. Swedish socialist here. Behave, everybody. Stop arguing about socialism. Fuzzy subjects. Thank you. I'm going to be back very, very soon on this channel, probably in about 10 hours or 5 hours. Ferrari guy, I'm just not gonna quite go there toward AI, but I will chat about it. I'm thinking of a quick chat on the philosophy channel about AI, what AI can do, what it can't do, and also this extraordinary sociology of the estimation of AI threats. Because one, I'm being a bit facetious here, but one feature of a lot of people who talk about how AI is the number one threat is that they study AI threats but don't know that much about other kinds of threats. Lots and lots of love, everybody. Thank you very much. Last question from somebody here: is Prigozhin jumping out of a window? No, not anytime soon. Perun, incredible work. You know, I just know how difficult it is to make, um, enriching and meaningful content on this platform. It's just so much harder than anybody thinks, and so it's just absolutely extraordinary achievement to do it at a high level. It's just extraordinary. So, everybody, lots of love, and probably back with you on the chat channel in a few hours. Bye bye for now.